Your grandmother did not have a recipe blog. She had a box. Cardboard, probably. Index cards inside it with her handwriting, stained at the corners from years of actual use. The recipes in that box are not the ones anyone talks about anymore. They are not the impressive ones. They're the ones she made when there was almost nothing left. When the wages had stopped and the pantry was running thin and dinner still had to happen for 6 people. These meals kept families alive through the Depression, through wartime, through every hard year in between. Most people today have never heard of them. The ones who grew up eating them do not call them poor man meals. They call them home. Most of these meals have completely disappeared. The people who knew them are mostly gone now. What they knew about feeding a family on almost nothing did not automatically pass down. Here are 10 of them. 1. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Soldiers returning from the Second World War already knew this dish by a name too crude for the kitchen table. Their mothers had been serving the same thing at home for years, just without the battlefield vocabulary. Thin slices of dried beef, cured to survive without refrigeration, stirred into a simple white sauce and ladled over toast. The dried beef sat in a pantry for months without spoiling. Butter and flour cooked together into a roux, milk added slowly until the sauce thickened, the beef stirred in last. It was salty enough that some grandmothers soaked it in water before cooking to take the edge off. Families who ate this were not eating badly, they were eating cleverly. 2. Pea soup with dumplings. Dried split peas were one of the cheapest things a family could keep in the house. A bag cost almost nothing. Stored in a cool, dry place, they lasted for years. On cold days, the peas went into a pot with water, a halved onion, and a ham bone if there was one available. They simmered for 2 hours or more until they dissolved into a thick green mass with a smoky depth that made it taste far more expensive than it was. The dumplings were just flour and water and a pinch of salt, mixed into a stiff dough and dropped by spoonfuls into the simmering pot. They puffed and swelled in the steam, soaking up the broth. Children who grew up in these kitchens remembered for the rest of their lives the sound of those dumplings plopping into the pot. There was a fairness ritual around the dumplings. Everyone at the table was watching to make sure the count came out even. In Scandinavian homes across the Midwest, this became Thursday dinner tradition, the one night each week when the whole house smelled of something simmering. 3. Hoover stew. The name was not a compliment. The shanty settlements that spread across the edges of American cities during the Depression were called Hoovervilles, after the president people blamed for their circumstances. The stew that fed them took his name too. Macaroni, canned tomatoes, canned corn, 1 or 2 hot dogs cut small to go further. Everything into one pot. The hot dog was a flavoring agent, not the point of the meal. A single hot dog sliced thin could make a pot of pasta taste like it had meat in it. Soup kitchens feeding hundreds of people a day ran this formula continuously throughout the 1930s. 4. Bread pudding. A loaf of bread that has gone stale is not a problem. It is a different ingredient. Before preservatives and plastic packaging, bread went hard within 2 or 3 days of baking. Stale bread, cubed and soaked in a mixture of milk, eggs, sugar, and cinnamon, then baked until the outside formed a golden crust and the inside set into something custardy and soft. Something heading toward the bin became something children asked for by name. Bakers sold day-old loaves at a discount, and their best customers were the most resourceful cooks. Nothing went to waste, and nothing needed to. 5. Ham, hocks, and beans. Every butchered pig contained cuts that wealthy buyers would not touch. The hock was one of them. The joint at the base of the leg, bony and collagen-rich, sold for almost nothing because it required patience. Patience most poor families had in abundance because they had no other option. Dried beans soaked overnight, then added to a pot with the hock, cold water, and an onion. Left to simmer on a low flame for 4 or 5 hours. What came out of that pot at the end of the day was extraordinary. The collagen from the hock dissolved into the cooking liquid and made it silky. The small pieces of meat that fell away from the bone shredded into the beans and flavored every bite. Served with cornbread baked in a cast-iron skillet, a single ham hock fed a family of 6. The people who perfected this recipe were not poor cooks, they were resourceful ones. Your grandparents understood exactly what a ham hock was worth. 6. Potato soup. No vegetable has fed more desperate people across more centuries than the potato. It grows in poor soil, stores through winter, costs almost nothing, and fills a stomach completely. Potatoes peeled and cubed, simmered with salt, an onion, a clove of garlic. When they softened enough to fall apart, some were mashed back into the broth to thicken it. A splash of milk at the end made it taste creamy without requiring cream. Irish immigrants who arrived in America after the famine made this soup with a familiarity that ran deeper than recipe knowledge. It had kept their families alive before. 7. Fried bologna. There is a class of food that the people who ate it from necessity refused to eat once they could afford better, and the people who discovered it later treated as a retro novelty. Fried bologna belongs to both categories. A thick slice cut from the log, scored around the edge to prevent it curling in the pan, laid into a hot skillet greased with whatever fat was on hand. The heat transformed it. The edges crisped and browned. The center bubbled up into a dome before settling back down. The smell filled the kitchen like something from a proper restaurant. Served on white bread with yellow mustard, occasionally a slice of processed cheese melted over the top while still in the pan, it was hot and filling and cost almost nothing. Children raised on it during lean years never forgot it. In coal mining towns across Appalachia, a fried bologna sandwich wrapped in wax paper was what men carried into the dark every morning. Some of them say it was the best thing they ever ate. 8. Tomato gravy. In August and September, kitchen gardens across the South and Midwest produced more tomatoes than any family could eat fresh. Tomato gravy took care of the rest. Bacon grease in a skillet, flour stirred in until golden, then chopped tomatoes simmered down until the acidity cooked off, and a thick, slightly tangy gravy remained. Over biscuits, it was breakfast. Over rice, it was dinner. The same formula worked with green tomatoes in June, ripe ones in August, and home-canned tomatoes in February. It tasted different every month of the year. 9. Milk toast. This is the meal that ended up in the dictionary as an insult. Mild, weak, bland, the adjective form of milk toast entered the language because people who had never needed to eat it decided it was contemptible. People who had needed to eat it knew better. Bread toasted until firm, hot milk poured over it and allowed to soak in. A little butter. A pinch of salt. Warm and filling enough to send a child to school on a cold morning when there was nothing else in the house. 3 ingredients. Simple does not mean insignificant. 10. Water pie, the recipe that stops people cold when they first hear about it. A pie with no filling. Or rather, a pie whose filling is made from the most basic pantry ingredients imaginable. Pie crust laid into a tin. Water poured in, sugar, flour, vanilla, and a few small pieces of butter added on top. The whole thing slid into a hot oven and baked for 45 minutes. What came out was not water. The heat had transformed the contents into something resembling a custard, smooth, slightly sweet, with a faint vanilla warmth. It was not apple pie, it was not lemon pie. It tasted like itself and like nothing else. Families who made it during the Depression understood that the point was not to recreate something expensive. The point was to give children a piece of pie on Sunday when there was no fruit to fill it with. Nobody at the table needed to know what was in it. These 10 meals are a record of something most people would rather not think about. That hunger lived very close to most families not very long ago. That the grandparents of people alive today fed their children from resourcefulness and necessity and never complained about it. They did not call these poor man meals. They called them dinner. The knowledge of what to do with almost nothing is what got lost. This is where it starts coming back.